said former President Donald Trump. This assassination attempt chief who was attending the rally with his family. On our democracy. Americans should be able to attend a political rally and express their political beliefs without fear of violence. And political candidates for our nation's highest office should be confident that their safety will never be compromised for their service. And although we're still learning about the shooter's motive, this attack was a shocking reminder that the threat of political violence is alive and well in our country. By all accounts, this was an inexcusable security and planning failure. And we need to get all of the facts about what happened that day and how we can ensure an attack like this is never allowed to happen again. Today's panel of witnesses leads the men and women who protect our top leaders and are investigating this crime. And I want to thank them both for being here today, as well as the Secret Service and FBI for a very productive and informative briefing with our committees last week. Today, our witnesses will help us begin to answer critical questions and get the information that we need to implement reforms that are clearly needed to strengthen security protocols for the U.S. Secret Service and the people who receive their protection. The Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee has already begun that work. This discussion comes in the midst of a bipartisan investigation that Senator Paul and I have launched, in which we launched shortly after the assassination attempt took place. Our teams are still collecting critical information, speaking to law enforcement, and piecing together the details of this event. This past weekend, a bipartisan team of our investigators, along with key staff from Senators Blumenthal and Senator Johnson's office, traveled to Pennsylvania to speak with local law enforcement officials, review critical information from security officials who were working alongside the Secret Service, and to see the site firsthand. And I want to thank the incredibly brave local law enforcement officers in and around Butler County who responded that afternoon and who met with my staff this past weekend. They have helped to answer tough questions, as well as discuss in detail how the event actually unfolded. I also want to thank the owners of Butler Country Farm Show and the American Glass Research for allowing my staff and law enforcement to walk the grounds and examine the roof of the building the gunman was able to assess. We greatly appreciate your assistance. I've also requested documents along with Senators Paul, Blumenthal, and Johnson related to security preparations, intelligence gathering on potential violence prior to the attack, and detailed explanations of the security response from federal, state, and local authorities. As part of our ongoing investigation, we also seek to speak with additional federal law enforcement personnel, including Secret Service agents who were responsible for securing the event. Today's hearing is an important opportunity to ask critical questions and to begin to give the American people the transparency and the answers that they certainly deserve. There are still many unanswered questions. We need additional information about the Secret Service's advanced planning efforts, the decisions surrounding sniper and counter-sniper team use, placement, and coordination. We also need answers about what appears to be a problematic communication system that limited efforts to relay information and respond to events as they unfolded real time. And while today is focused on asking difficult questions about what went wrong, I also want to thank the men and women of the Secret Service who in an instant will lay their lives on the line to protect our nation's leaders. They have incredibly challenging jobs, and they must continue their mission no matter what our hearing and investigation reveals. I'm also grateful to our Senate Judiciary Committee colleagues for joining us in this important discussion. Given their key role in oversight of both of the agencies represented before us today, and it's very clear that the U.S. Senate is focused on a productive conversation that will generate real answers and real reforms. And I appreciate all the work from members of both of our committees to help us achieve this absolutely essential goal. I would now like to recognize Ranking Member Paul for his opening remarks.
18 days ago, a would-be assassin managed to climb onto a roof 400 feet from the stage where the former president and leading presidential candidate Donald Trump was speaking. The assassin's bullet struck President Trump, narrowly missing a fatal blow thanks to a last-minute head turn. Tragically, not everyone was so fortunate. A beloved husband and father in the audience was killed, his life stolen in an instant. 2 others remain seriously injured, their futures uncertain. The lives of law enforcement officers working the event and those in the audience have been forever changed. Yet the media has shamefully moved on to other stories, and Google has been caught trying to suppress iconic images of a bloody Donald Trump, images showcasing the resolve of our nation in the face of the attack. But the American people have not forgotten, and we will not forget. There is no question that this was a monumental failure by the Secret Service. They had one job, and they failed. We know that. What remains unclear is who specifically failed, how they failed, and what must be done to ensure that something like this never happens again. America deserves to know that those responsible for this failure are, frankly, not going to be in charge of securing the upcoming Democrat National Convention. We need to know that someone's been placed on suspension, that someone won't be in charge of the next Donald Trump rally. Now, I was encouraged to hear that the acting director, Rowe, has initiated a disciplinary investigation in addition to the ongoing Secret Service policy review. This is an important step. However, real accountability will require a comprehensive examination of all the facts, which still remain unclear. This past Friday, my investigative team went to Pennsylvania to meet with local law enforcement and document the scene. One of the concerning things my team was told is that no one from Secret Service has talked to them since the shooting. I don't know how an investigation into what failed can be conducted without talking to the officers and agencies who were relied upon to do much of the work. Many questions remain unanswered about the planning and performance of security for July 13th. While a host of errors led to this security disaster, we now know local enforcement officers were suspicious of the shooter 90 minutes in advance of the shooting. There are 2 glaring issues we need to focus on. First, why were the AGR grounds and the roof left unattended? Why was the AGR building, the shooter's perch, left outside the perimeter? Local law enforcement told my staff that they specifically flagged the vulnerability of the building to the Secret Service and were told that it would be taken care of. Clearly, these vulnerabilities were not addressed. Second, why was Donald Trump allowed to take the stage, and why wasn't he removed from the stage when a suspicious individual was taking increasingly suspicious activities? Over 20 minutes before President Trump began his speech, the Secret Service Command Center had been made aware of an individual with a rangefinder. At least 10 minutes before it was confirmed, the Secret Service's counter-sniper team had been made aware of the suspicious subject and provided a photograph and a detailed description. Why was the event not delayed until the individual was found and checked out? Interviews with local law enforcement paint a different picture in critical places from what we have been told by the Secret Service in other briefings. Now we need to hear from the Secret Service agents responsible for security that day. Our committee has formally requested interviews with those agents, but we have not yet been allowed to speak to them. I expect Director Rowe today to tell us when we will be allowed to talk to these people. Finally, let me close with this. Mistakes, grave mistakes were made on July 13th, but that does not take away from the bravery of dozens of federal, state, and local officers that day. We are grateful for their sacrifices and professionalism. They deserve the truth now also. It is our duty and our utmost responsibility to ensure that we learn from this failure and hold those responsible accountable.
I would now like to recognize Chairman Durbin of the Senate Judiciary Committee for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Senator Peters. This is a rare joint meeting of the 2 committees, but we have matching jurisdiction, and I think it's the most efficient way to get to the truth. So thank you for letting us join you today. We've all seen the movies. We've read the books. The international assassin with sophisticated technology, elaborate plans, well-honed skills, sets out to kill a leading political figure in the United States. But how does that match the reality of what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, when a 20-year-old introverted college student outsmarted one of the most sophisticated American law enforcement agencies in history, came within an inch of killing a former president of the United States? That's why we gathered today to ask these hard questions. There's more to this story and other aspects that we ought to consider as well. We cannot lose sight of the factor that contributed to the violence on July 13th. Widespread, easy access to AR-15 military-style rifles. While we rely on the Secret Service to protect elected officials, we must acknowledge the unique challenges they face in light of the proliferation of weapons of war on our street. Pennsylvania, like many states, allows individuals to openly carry a loaded rifle without a permit. To make matters worse, assault rifles can easily be purchased from unlicensed dealers without a background check because of dangerous loopholes in our gun laws. This same kind of firearm has been used to carry out mass shootings in Newtown, Uvalde, Las Vegas, and Highland Park, Illinois, killing dozens of children and adults and injuring many more. Looking across this dais, I recognize we have our differences on many issues, but when it comes to the protection of the president and presidential candidates, we should stand united. We know that protecting our elected officials is essential to a functioning democracy. I hope this hearing can be an example of how we will work together on a bipartisan basis to not only understand this shocking event, but to ensure it never happens again. We must do this without the incendiary language and conspiracy mongering that too often dominates our political discourse today. Ongoing investigations by the Secret Service and the FBI are critical, but Congress, the victims' families, and the American people deserve transparency and accountability now. I'll now turn to my partner on the Judiciary Committee, Ranking Member Lindsey Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several of us from the military have a military background. If this happened in the military, a lot of people would be fired. And if a lot of people are not fired, the system failed yet again. Having said that, the people who are brave and jumped on the stage to protect the president need to be applauded. We need to learn what happened, make corrective action, but somebody's got to be fired. Nothing's going to change until somebody loses their job. Thank you.
It's the practice of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses. So if our two witnesses could please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Our first witness is Ronald Rowe Jr. Mr. Rowe is currently the acting director of the United States Secret Service. Prior to this role, Acting Director Rowe was the 23rd Deputy Director of the Secret Service. He has had a distinguished 25-year career in the Secret Service, from coordinating major security operations to collaborating with other government and law enforcement agencies. Additionally, he has served as the Chief of Staff to the Director, as Deputy Assistant Director for the Office of Protective Operations, and as Deputy Assistant Director for the Office of Intergovernmental and Legislative Affairs. Mr. Director, thank you for appearing before this committee today. You are now recognized for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Peters, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Paul, Ranking Member Graham, and distinguished members of the committees. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. A critical part of the Secret Service mission is protecting our nation's current and former government leaders. The attempted assassination of former President Donald J. Trump on Saturday, July 13th, 2024 in Butler, Pennsylvania, was a failure on multiple levels. I join you and all Americans in condemning the horrific assault on former President Trump, Corey Comparator, James Copenhaver, and David Dutch. And I extend my deepest sympathies to the Comparator family and my sincere wishes for Mr. Copenhaver and Mr. Dutch's continued recovery. Before I begin, though, I want to commend the heroic actions of the men and women of the United States Secret Service on July 13th. Our special agents shielded the former president with their bodies while shots were still being fired. Selflessly, willing to make the ultimate sacrifice without hesitation. I am extremely proud of these actions and those taken by the counter-sniper team to neutralize the threat that prevented further loss of life. And I applaud the actions of our tactical teams that responded so quickly. I would also like to express my gratitude to our federal, state, and local partners. We rely on these critical relationships, which have developed over decades of daily collaboration to secure protective events and conduct criminal investigations. As you're aware, there are multiple ongoing investigations of the attack and the security failures that occurred that day. I pledge my full support to those inquiries so the Secret Service, your committees, and the American people have a thorough and complete understanding of what happened leading up to and during July 13th. I will not wait for the results of those findings to assess where we failed that day. I have taken and will continue to take immediate steps to ensure we do not repeat those failures. Since my appointment as the acting director 1 week ago, I identified gaps in our security on July 13th and have implemented corrective actions. One of my first actions as acting director was traveling to the Butler Farm Show site to better understand how our protection failed. I went to the roof of the AGR building where the assailant fired shots, and I laid in a prone position to evaluate his line of sight. What I saw made me ashamed. As a career law enforcement officer and a 25-year veteran with the Secret Service, I cannot defend why that roof was not better secured. To prevent similar lapses from occurring in the future, I directed our personnel to ensure every event site security plan is thoroughly vetted by multiple experienced supervisors before it is implemented. It is clear to me that other protective enhancements could have strengthened our security at the Butler event. As such, I have directed the expanded use of unmanned aerial systems at protective sites to help detect threats on roofs and other elevated threats. I've also directed resources to facilitate our protective site communications, particularly our communications with our state and local partners. In addition, I have instructed the asset request for Secret Service protective details to be approved expeditiously and have ordered the maximum use of requested personnel at protective sites to address this heightened security environment. I've heard your calls for accountability, and I take them very seriously. And given the magnitude of this failure, the Secret Service's Office of Professional Responsibility is reviewing the actions and decision-making of Secret Service personnel in the lead up to and on the day of the attack. If this investigation reveals that Secret Service employees violated agency protocols, those employees will be held accountable to our disciplinary process. With respect to congressional investigations and requests for information, I instructed my staff to provide full cooperation and respond expeditiously on a continuing basis to ensure you have the information you need to conduct your critical oversight. In my testimony before you today, I will provide details on the Secret Service's advanced security planning for the Butler Farm Show site. Facts as we know them regarding the incident itself, known breakdowns in executing the security plan, and corrective actions that the agency is taking to ensure that nothing like this happens again. But I do not believe that inadequate time to plan for this event was a factor in the failure. As you saw in my written statement, I am prepared to provide an overview of the security planning leading up to and during the July 13th attack. However, I would like to point out that based on what I know right now, neither the Secret Service counter-sniper teams nor members of the former president's security detail had any knowledge that there was a man on the roof of the AGR building with a firearm. It is my understanding those personnel were not aware the assailant had a firearm until they heard gunshots. Prior to that, they were operating with the knowledge that local law enforcement was working an issue of a suspicious individual prior to the shots being fired. I regret that information was not passed to Congress and the public sooner with greater frequency. And I fear this lack of information has given rise to multiple false and dangerous conspiracy theories about what took place that day. and I want to debunk these theories. Let me address one conspiracy directly. The Secret Service counter-sniper neutralized the assailant within seconds after the assailant fired his weapon. That counter-sniper had full discretion to use deadly force to stop an attacker and did not need to seek authorization to fire. I am immensely proud of the selfless dedication of our employees to the mission. Every day, across the globe, the men and women answer the call to protect our nation's leaders, and the standard is no fail for a reason. During our current high operational tempo, I want and I need to ensure that the Secret Service workforce are uplifted so they can focus on carrying out the mission. They have my full support, and I'm confident in their abilities to ensure the safety and security of the people we protect. They are worthy of trust and confidence, and they deserve your support as well as the support of the American people. Chairman Peters, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Paul, Ranking Member Graham, and members of the committees, thank you for the opportunity to testify at this joint hearing. I will submit the remainder of my statement for the record, and I will answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Our second witness is Paul Abate. Mr. Abate is the Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation at the Department of Justice. In this role, Deputy Director Abate oversees all FBI domestic and international investigative and intelligence activities. Prior to his appointment as Deputy Director, he has had a distinguished 3 decades within the FBI leading counterterrorism efforts, and most recently as the Associate Deputy Director of the FBI, where he's responsible for the management of all FBI personnel, budget, administration, as well as infrastructure. Mr. Abate, thank you for appearing before the committee here today. You are recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman Peters and Durbin, Ranking Members Paul and Graham, and distinguished members of the committee. It is a privilege to appear before you today to discuss the FBI's investigation of the attempted assassination of former President Trump on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. Before going further, I want to again offer my and our condolences to the victims of this heinous attack, to the family and loved ones of heroic firefighter and father Corey Comparator, to Mr. Dutch, to Mr. Koppenhaver, who continue to recover, and to former President Trump, who was also struck by a bullet fired from the shooter's rifle. Our thoughts and prayers are with each of them and their families and loved ones. Within minutes of the attack, the FBI field office in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, received notification of the assassination attempt and responded to the scene immediately with a surge of resources, quickly moving forward on the investigation. From the outset, the FBI has been investigating this attack as an assassination attempt and an act of domestic terrorism. Our team continues to conduct a full, thorough, and objective investigation, and will continue to follow all leads and avenues of investigation to logical conclusion, leaving no stone unturned. While it's not typical to provide details of an ongoing investigation, this, as we all know, is an extraordinarily tragic set of circumstances of the utmost national importance, making it essential to inform the American public and Congress what is known right now with full transparency. The investigation remains focused, of course, on determining motive, identifying any potential co-conspirators or others with knowledge of the attack, and building out a timeline of shooter Thomas Crook's actions in advance of and during the attack. Thus far, though absolutely nothing has been ruled out, the investigation has not identified a motive, nor any co-conspirators or others with advanced knowledge. To date, the FBI team has conducted more than 460 interviews, executed search warrants, including at the shooter's residence, and seized electronic media to include phones, laptops, hard drives, and thumb drives. Legal process has been issued to dozens of companies, and we've received more than 2,000 tips from the public. The full resources of the FBI have been brought to bear in furtherance of the investigation. Agents, analysts, professional staff, experts. I've personally visited the site of this horrific attack and seen firsthand the work of FBI Pittsburgh and our partners on the front line, and want to thank all involved for their ongoing and tireless efforts to get the answers that we need and to deliver justice. Specialized resources deployed included evidence response teams, victim services specialists, laboratory and operational technology division resources to process physical and digital evidence, a shooting reconstruction team. Additionally, our explosive experts have analyzed the 3 IEDs recovered, 2 from the shooter's vehicle, 1 from the family residence. And our behavioral analysis unit, importantly, is helping to build a profile of the shooter to include his mental state. Next, I want to provide a brief highlighted overview of the timeline that has been established to date through witness interviews and other information. Again, this is our understanding at present and is subject to change and further refinement as more facts are collected. On July 3rd, the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania was announced. On July 6th, the shooter registered to attend the rally and performed a search for, quote, how far was Oswald from Kennedy? On July 7th, the shooter traveled from his home to the Butler Farm Show grounds and remained there for approximately 20 minutes. We assess this shows advanced planning and reconnaissance on his part. On July 12th, the shooter traveled from his home to the Clairton Sportsman Club, where he practiced shooting. On the morning of July 13th, at approximately 10 a.m., the shooter returned to the Farm Show grounds and remained there for about 70 minutes before returning home again. At approximately 1:30 p.m., while at the residence, the shooter's father gave him a rifle for the purpose he believed of going back to the Sportsman Club. About 25 minutes later, the shooter purchased ammunition while en route to the Butler Farm Show grounds. The subject then arrived at the scene and was moving around the Farm Show grounds close to the American Glass Research AGR building, from which he ultimately committed the attack. Shortly thereafter, at approximately 3:51 p.m., the shooter flew a drone approximately 200 yards from the Farm Show grounds for about 11 minutes. The drone and controller were later found in the subject's car. Analysis has not revealed any photos or video taken by the drone, but we can confirm that he was live streaming at the time and would have been able to view it on his controller. The first reported sighting the shooter by local law enforcement was at approximately 4:26 p.m. At approximately 5:10 p.m., the shooter was again identified by local law enforcement as a suspicious person around the AGR building. And at approximately 5:14 p.m., a local SWAT operator took a photo of the shooter. At about 5:32 p.m., local SWAT observed the shooter next to the AGR building using his phone, browsing news sites, and with a rangefinder. At approximately 5:38 p.m., the photo of the shooter taken earlier was sent to local SWAT operators in a text message group. Subsequently, approximately 25 minutes prior to the shooting, the U.S. Secret Service command post was notified of a suspicious person. Officers lost sight of the subject from approximately 6:02 p.m. to 6:08 p.m., but continued to communicate with each other in an attempt to locate him. Recently discovered video from a local business shows the shooter pulling himself up onto the AGR building rooftop at approximately 6:06 p.m. And at approximately 6:08 p.m., the subject was observed on the roof by local law enforcement. At approximately 6:11 p.m., a local police officer was lifted to the roof by another officer, saw the shooter, and radioed that he was armed with, quote, a long gun. Within approximately the next 30 seconds, the shots were fired. The evidence recovery team found 8 shell casings at the scene next to the shooter's body. We believe that the shooter, fired 8 rounds. While the investigation has not determined motive, the investigative team continues to review information from legal returns, including online and social media accounts. Something just very recently uncovered that I want to share is a social media account which is believed to be associated with the shooter in about the 2019-2020 timeframe. There were over 700 comments posted from this account. Some of these comments, if ultimately attributable to the shooter, appear to reflect anti-Semitic and anti-immigration themes, to espouse political violence, and are described as extreme in nature. While the investigative team is still working to verify this account to determine if it did in fact belong to the shooter, we believe it important to share and note it today, particularly given the general absence of other information to date from social media and other sources of information that reflect on the shooter's potential motive and mindset. These are the facts, in part, that the investigation has revealed to date. While the shooter is dead, our work is very much ongoing and urgent. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any and all questions.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. We'll now proceed. Chairman Durbin and Ranking Member Graham will ask the first two questions. I will then ask question Ranking Member Paul, and then after that we will alternate between members of the Judiciary, recognized by Chairman Durbin, and members of the Homeland Security Committee, recognized by me. With that, Senator Durbin, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Senator Peters. I would like to begin by making a statement. It's not in the form of a question, and you'll understand why when I say it. In 20 days, we're going to start the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. I have been briefed by the law enforcement agencies plans for security for that event. Tens of thousands of people will be there, including some of the highest ranking politicians in the United States. I trust that both of your agencies can answer in the affirmative if I ask you whether you're actively engaged in working with the development of security plan, taking into consideration the lessons of July 13th.
Senator, that is 100% yes from the Secret Service.
Yes, from the FBI as well, sir. We've been working on this for well over a year in preparation.
I'm not going to ask for details for obvious reasons, but I do want to ask a question about the Secret Service staffing. Congress has nearly doubled the budget for the Secret Service over the last 10 years, from $1.8 billion in fiscal year 2014 to $3 billion in fiscal year 2024. Despite this large increase in funding, the number of agents in protective operations has fallen from 4,027 to 3,671 during that same time period, an approximate 9% reduction. Acting Director Rowe, what accounts for protective operations losing 356 agents over the past 10 years?
So, Senator, with respect to where we are today on staffing, and then I'll address the 10-year where we were. In this year alone, we are going to end the year on the positive of 200 plus agents. That's the first time in a number of years that we've been able to do that. Part of that was gaining some efficiencies in our hiring process. But what I want to re-emphasize is that we have not dropped standards. Only 2% of every applicant actually makes it through the hiring process. We are filling our classes at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and we are doing this ramp up as part of what lies ahead of us with the LA Olympics in 2028. With respect to what has happened in years prior, this is a difficult and challenging job, being a Secret Service agent. Living your life by somebody else's schedule, constantly away from your family, constantly having to meet increased operational and investigative demands, which we gladly do, but it's not for everyone. And I think there are times where people have to make tough choices and they decide to leave the agency. But that doesn't mean that they were any less of an agent or that they weren't committed to the mission, because we are all committed to being patriots and serving our country and protecting our nation's highest leaders. I think there was a variety of factors. Some of it was the pandemic. Some of it was the economy or other opportunities. We have people that are very skilled in cyber that often leave the job. Some of the protective skills that they acquire are also in demand in the private sector. But some of the mechanisms that we put in place just in the last year is also retaining our workforce. And that's what we are focused on right now.
The Government Accountability Office has determined that restaffing from these losses have been slowed due to a number of factors, including the years-long background checks for prospective agents and the assignments agents must work through before being assigned to protection. Given these constraints, what steps have you taken to improve recruitment?
So we're actually putting out targeted recruitment opportunities. So we've just recently put it out for within our uniform division for our counter sniper unit, our hazardous agent medical emergency response unit, our counter assault team on the special agent side. So we're actually trying to gather the best and the brightest. And I will tell you that we are having great success with a lot of these vacancies. But what I want to reiterate is that, for example, on the counter assault vacancy. We had 700 applicants that applied for this. Really what we will glean after they make it through the process, and they have to be able to hold a top secret SCI clearance, will be, if we realize 15 out of that tranche, that's a 2% pass rate. So it is very competitive, and we are trying to make sure that we are getting the best and the brightest without dropping standards.
One last question for either one of you. What is the purpose of a rangefinder? And once this assassin was identified as using a rangefinder, wasn't that proof positive that he was a dangerous individual?
So I'll say, Senator, that obviously somebody is trying to determine where they are in proximity to a location, a fixed location. I'll defer to my colleague here, but I believe it was a recreation or sports related. I thought I had read that it was a golf range finder. Nonetheless, it still would have provided him the ability to provide the distance that he was away from his intended target.
Wasn't that enough?
As far as raising suspicion,
Yes,
I think he was identified as being suspicious by local law enforcement.
and nothing happened.
Well, I know that local law enforcement was attempting to locate him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Member Graham.
Thank you. Let's go back to the resources. Do you need more money?
Senator, listen, there isn't a single branch, or a single agency in the executive branch that that needs more money. Everyone would take more resources. We've had a great relationship with the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of Management and Budget.
Do you feel constrained to ask for more resources by anybody?
No, sir, we don't. And actually, we have a great relationship with our appropriators and obviously the authorizing committees, and they have always looked out for the Secret Service.
So I would encourage you to think big when it comes to resourcing the department in light of what happened here. At the time of the shooting, the Iranians were threatening high-level American officials, including President Trump, right?
Senator, it's widely known.
Right? FBI?
Yes, Senator, that's 100%
Did that
correct.
factor into the security footprint?
So, Senator, what I will say is that it is widely known that the Iranians do not like us. I would refer you to the National
Well, it's not
Security.
that they don't like us. They threatened to kill certain people, and they named them.
Correct, sir. But I can't publicly
It's
comment.
not like, I hate America. I'm going to kill these 3 guys.
Right. I cannot publicly comment, sir, on.
Well, they publicly comment on it. I mean, it's not.
But
what
Senator,
you
what
think.
I'm trying to say is I cannot publicly comment
Okay.
on what
Fair enough.
intelligence, but I
Fair
can
enough.
assure you that we do a threat-based protective model.
I'd like to have that model provided to the committee. Could you do that?
Yes, sir.
Could you also give us the protocols that are in place to secure a site like this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. One, the protective detail around President Trump, I know them all very well. They're brave men and women. And these questions is not to belittle anybody. They're trying to find out how the system fails so badly. You say you're not reluctant to ask for more money. What do we need to do to make it easier to hire people without lowering our standards? I mean, I know it's a hard job. Can we do anything to help you?
So I think we're willing to take that back, sir. I think we're working on our time to hire.
Well, if you had more people, you'd have more time off.
That's true, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
well, let's get more people, more time off. These are tough jobs. I mean, people on this committee know.
Yes,
I don't
sir.
know how they hold a family together doing what they're doing. It's the military really on steroids. The encrypted app. Paul, can you tell us about these apps? Have they been broken into? The guy had some apps that were encrypted.
I think we've experienced a range of returns on this. Some of the applications that he was using online were encrypted in nature. Some of the email accounts.
Have we
that he
broken
was,
into them?
We've received returns. There are some that we have not been able to get information back because of their encrypted nature.
Is
That
there any way to
true.
solve that problem?
Senator, we've talked about this before. We need a solution that provides lawful access to law enforcement.
So you're telling me the guy that took 8 shots at the president, former president, has apps that we can't get into that may, if you could get into, reveal some relevant information?
That is correct, Senator.
So if he were talking to some foreign power, and I don't think any foreign power would hire this guy, by the way. So I'm not overly worried this was some great plot by the Iranians, because they couldn't even think of this. However, there could come a day where something like this is very important. How do we solve this problem?
Senator, as we've been saying, we need a solution that provides lawful access where when we go to a company...
You're telling me, I agree with you, I'm not blaming you. We have encrypted apps of an assassin, a murderer, and we can't get into them all these days after. That needs to be fixed, folks. I'm all for privacy, but to a point. What if, in the future, somebody's using these apps to communicate with a foreign power? I think we need to know these things. We need to know them in real time. So lessons learned is that everything failed. Corrective action, seems to me you need more money and more people. Accountability. At the end of the day, how many people do you think will be relieved of their duties, Mr. Rowe, because of this?
Senator, I publicly cannot, and I cannot weigh in on that right now, right? It has to be a fair and neutral process.
From a fair point of view, would you say this is a major system failure at every turn, and those in charge of the system in question, not only was it embarrassing, they failed?
So, Senator, again, if there were policy violations, those individuals will be held accountable, and they will be subject
Just send
to our
us the
table of
policies
penalties.
if you could.
Yes, sir,
Thank
we
you.
will. But they will be held to our table of penalties, which
Thank you.
will include up to termination.
Thank you.
Director Rowe, in your testimony here today, as well as in your written testimony, you said very, very clearly that you can't defend why that building with with the shooter on top of it was not better covered. You were very clear. You cannot defend that. So my question to you is, my understanding is that there's a detailed site survey that is done prior to an event to identify potential threat points. So talk to me about that site survey. I'm sure you've had a chance to look at it now after action. And how did that site survey get approved when it was so clear that that was a major threat from that building?
Thank you, Senator. So our Pittsburgh field office did the advance. During that advance, not only were they discussing amongst themselves about mitigating the line of sight, but also they were discussing with other agencies that were supporting it. Our counter snipers met with their counterparts. The team lead and team lead met. They walked the site. They identified the AGR building. And if I may, Senator, if I could point out something right now, if I may, and we will place this for the record, but this is the point of view. This is from the second floor of the AGR building. This point of view is the point of view where the counter sniper team locally was posted. The gold arrow indicates where the shooter fired from. Looking left, why was the assailant not seen? When we were told that building was going to be covered, that there had been a face-to-face that afternoon, that our team leads met, this was the view. Let me show you another view, Senator. B. This view is a reenactment by one of my agents. Laying flat. There is a 5-inch rise on the middle of that roof. The assailant would have had to present his bore over that to get his shot off. The view underneath reflects the perspective that he would have had. Again, I call your attention back to the first exhibit if they'd have looked left. Give me C. This is what our counter sniper team saw. Shooter, no elbows. You barely make out the crown of his head. Below it, the assailant up prone. And let me just tell you, our counter sniper, this individual, I know him. I consider him a friend. He has covered me operationally in conflict zones. And when I did my time on the president's detail, he exemplifies the courage, the skill, and the ability to respond under great stress in such short time to neutralize the threat and prevent further loss of life. Getting back to your question, Senator, these were discussions that were had between the Pittsburgh field office, the local counterparts, and everyone supporting that visit that day. And that's why when I laid in that position, I could not, and I will not, and I cannot understand why there was not better coverage, or at least somebody looking at that roof line when that's where they were posted.
Director Rowe, the Secret Service, state and local law enforcement were on multiple communication channels, is my understanding, during that time. And as a result, local law enforcement was only able to call in to a state command center that was then relayed from the Secret Service. This seemed to be a recurring issue in emergency situations that we're finding with the federal government, that there's not a seamless way to communicate, particularly if you're relying on local law enforcement to deal with what was clearly a major vulnerability. Local law enforcement in Butler told my staff that that they had no way of communicating directly with the Secret Service. And if I listened to Mr. Bates saying there was about a 30 seconds between when the local law enforcement reported that there was a man on the roof with a gun, 30 seconds, if it's communicated directly to a counter sniper team, would that be enough time to react prior to the firing of those shots?
Senator, if we'd had that information, they would have been able to address it more quickly. It appears that that information was stuck or siloed in that state and local channel. I will tell you, though, that there were our tactical elements did have, not only did they have embeds from Butler County ESU with them, but they also had radios on the tactical net. It is troubling to me that we did not get that information as quickly as we should have. We didn't know that there was this incident going on, and the only thing we had was that locals were working an issue at the 3 o'clock, which would have been the former president's right-hand side, which is where the shot came. Nothing about man on the roof, nothing about man with a gun. None of that information ever made it over our net.
So that will change?
Yes, sir. We are working right now to figure